And here we are at last at part 7 of this week's lecture series, Domestic Decoration 1, Household Display. In this section, I just want to sort of close down the discussion of this week and talk a little bit about the art of self-fashioning. So when we look at sort of Andrew Wallace Hadrill's way of organizing and mapping social relationships onto the space and the decorative environment of the house, of the Roman house in particular, and Bettina Bergman's way of sort of looking at different aspects of the decorative environment in relationship to one another and how the sort of iconographic build that occurs as you move through space and create a sort of an oeuvre of artistic elements that are in conjunction with one another. I want you to sort of be thinking about how these interpretative strategies work outside of a Roman context. So going back into your modern house type that you thought of for your earlier assignments on these lectures, and trying to associate the ways in which we think about sort of grand, humble, public, private, and the sort of associative building of different artistic elements, how that works in a modern environment, and especially if you've chosen, say, the house that you live in or a place that you know well, how realistic is it to sort of create these interpretations based on linking these ideas together? One thing to bear in mind is that Bergman and Andrew Wallace Hadrill, both drawing off of these ancient literary sources, are attempting to kind of create and reconstruct the mindset of the ancient Romans themselves, right? By using rhetorical strategies and the words of ancient authors as a sort of guide in the way that people might have understood artwork at the time. So it may make sense that these ideas don't map so neatly onto different cultural concepts, right? So our contemporary houses, for example, are not built for the client patron system where your friends and dependents come visit you every morning and either asks for gifts or favors from you, right? So there are sort of different social norms at play that also may help to define what kinds of art is appropriate for different circumstances. So this is just something to bear in mind, this difference between our contemporary ways of thinking and ancient ways of thinking. And then there's the question of whether or not, even through our sources, we can ever really reconstruct an ancient way of thinking about space, right? There's always that sort of perceptual difference between the past and the present. We may try to bridge that gap as best as we can, and I think both Wallace Hadrill and Bergman have interesting ways of approaching doing just that. But there is always the sort of question in our minds, or there should be, of, am I viewing this differently? That is not to say that a contemporary view on these artworks is less valid, it's just differently contextualized. So with all that said, and hopefully with a whole lot going on in your minds as you look at your houses, both modern and ancient, that you've chosen for the assignments this week, your final thing that I would like you to do, and we will be coming back, I'm hoping to sort of build further off of these assignments in the future, so this work won't be in vain. I want you to start trying to think about that sort of ancient modern mapping. Does the general idea of these grand, humble, public, private axes map comfortably onto your modern house type that you thought of? Does the idea of doing a sort of deep interpretation, relating different artworks together to create sort of maybe a view of how the patron's thinking, or of the interests, or of what is trying to be communicated to visitors, does that make sense in the modern house type that you thought of? So what I want you to actually do is to choose an area of the modern plan that you identified in parts 1 and 2, whose placement on the grand, humble, public, private axes corresponds with the ancient area you chose in parts 3 to 6. So if you chose a grand private area of your Roman house to look at the decorations of, choose a grand private area of the contemporary house type that you chose as well to compare it with. And then the sort of questions that I want you to think about are the following. 1, what kinds of decoration would you expect to find, or do you find, if you're using a real place, in the modern example in that area? So what is the decoration that you find in a contemporary house of the type that you found in a grand private area, if that's the type of space that you're working with? And then two, how well do you think the decorations map onto these social axes that we were thinking of? Do the decorations in that area seem targeted towards a particular likely audience? And does that likely audience sort of fit the mold of who you would expect to be in a place that falls on the axes where this place falls? If you have any questions, if you have any clarifications that you need, feel free to email me and be in touch. I'm really looking forward to seeing your answers to these assignment questions. And I want to thank you all so much for following along and for bearing with me as I try to get used to this new format. Like and subscribe, not like you have a choice. I will see you next time in our next set of lectures. Let's hope it goes more smoothly from here on out. Thanks again.